In this video tutorial, I'm going to show you what data validation is and how to use it, as well as how to use conditional formatting to create this interactive quiz in Microsoft Excel. Let's have a look at the example. Here I have a quiz in Microsoft Excel. We've got 3 questions and we have the score at the bottom. The first question, what is half of 26? On the right hand side where the answer can go, you see we have a drop down in the cell which I can click, and that provides me with 3 possible answers. I can type these answers in, but if I try typing in a number which isn't included in that list, then Excel won't let me. So I choose one of these answers, and let's say I choose an incorrect answer. The cell is coloured red to show me that that is an incorrect answer. If I change that to a correct answer, then you'll see the cell is now coloured green, and down here the score has increased by 1. Let's try that with the second question. What is 3 times 3 times 3? If I choose an incorrect answer, the cell goes red and the score doesn't change. If I change that to a correct answer, the cell goes green and the score goes up by 1. Finally, this last question, what is half of 6 times 7? Again, if we choose an incorrect answer, the cell goes red, and a correct answer, the cell goes green, and now we have full marks in our score. So let's see step by step how we can create this interactive quiz. We're going to create this quiz in 5 steps. First of all, we'll look at writing out the questions. Then we'll look at creating the answers so that we can have that drop-down list of answers that we saw and preventing the user from typing in anything other than those 3 possible answers. We'll then look at developing the scoring system that adds up the number of correct answers and shows that score. We'll then look at the colouring or the shading so that we can identify if an answer is correct or incorrect by shading the cell red or green. And then finally, we'll look at creating the overall look so that the quiz looks a little more interesting and a little less like a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. So the data validation that I mentioned earlier is going to be covered in step 2, creating the answers. And the conditional formatting is going to be covered in step 4, which is creating the colouring. So let's get started then with the questions. The first thing I'm going to do is to zoom in, because at the moment these cells are quite small and we won't have an awful lot of content. Now to zoom in, you can use this slider at the bottom right hand side, or you can simply hold down the control button on your mouse control button at the bottom left of your keyboard, and then use the wheel on your mouse to zoom in. That's what I've done there. Next, I'm going to write out my first question. So this can be a quiz on any topic you like. It could be on maths, it could be on IT and computing, it could be on geography, it could be on general knowledge, anything at all. So for the moment, I'll do a similar quiz to the one I showed in the demonstration. So question 1, I'm going to write, what is 2 times 2 times 2? Then I'm going to write out my second question, and of course you can have as many questions as you want. I'm just going to do 3 for this demonstration, but you can have as many questions as you want in your quiz. There's no upper limit other than time. So my next question is, what is 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5? And then my third question is going to be, what is half of 3 times 8? Okay, so there are my 3 questions. Now we can see how long the text is. This second question is the longest question, which is why it's important to write out your questions first, because then you can see which is going to be the best column for allowing the user to type in the answers. So in this case, I've written out my questions in column C, which gives me a little bit of space on the left hand side, so I can then move this quiz so it's more in the center of the screen. But my answers, I think, are going to be in this column F over here. So what I'm going to do now, once I've written out my questions, is to write out the answers and provide those cells for the user to click in. So step 2 then, doing the answers. The first thing I'm going to do is put a border around each of these cells excuse me, so that they stand out a little bit more easily. You'll see that's what I did in the demonstration over here that I showed earlier on. So how do I do that? Well, the first thing to do is to click on the cell that you want a border to be around, and then in the Home tab you'll see in the font section here we have a borders button, and I'm simply going to choose thick outside borders like that, which puts a border around that cell. Now if you want to do more than one cell at the same time, you can do that. I'm going to click on this cell, and then I'm going to hold down the Control key again at the bottom left of my keyboard. Now what that allows me to do is to select cells in my spreadsheet that aren't necessarily together in a group. So I'm going to select this cell, and then with the Control button held down, select this cell as well. And if you have more than 3 questions, then keeping the Control button held down, you'll simply click on each cell that will contain an answer. Once you've done that, simply click on this borders button again, and you'll now have a thick, bold border around each cell that will contain the answers. Now, the next step is to provide that list of answers. This is what we call data validation. We'll see how this works now. The first thing I'm going to do is to write out here in these 3 cells what the possible answers are that I'm going to provide to the user. So for this first question, 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8. So of course one of these cells here will contain that correct answer of 8. Let's put that in the middle there. I'm just going to select these columns and just center align so that I can see those more easily. Now, what are the 2 options that I'm going to provide that are wrong answers? Well, let's have 4 and 12. So these are going to be the 3 possible answers that the user will see when they click on this cell and choose that little drop down arrow. Before we do that though, let's add in the multiple answers for this next question. So 5 plus 4 is 9, plus 3 is 12, plus 2 is 14, plus 1 is 15. So the correct answer here is 15. And of course it's really important to make sure that you do have the correct answer when you're doing this quiz. So let's put in the correct answer as the first option here, and then put some possible answers here that are wrong. And then finally our last question, 3 times 8, 3 8s are 24, half of 24 is 12, so let's put 12 as the last answer there, and then put in some incorrect answers here. So we've now set up our answers. Now I've used 3 possible answers, but again you can use more than that or you can use less than that. You could, for example, have a true or a false option, or you could have as many different multiple options as you want. It doesn't matter, it is entirely flexible. I'll show you how to use it and how to do this data validation, and then it really will be a case of just offering as many or as few different options for each question as you want. So to provide the user with the ability to click on this cell and see these numbers here as a drop-down list, we need to go to data validation. So at the top of your screen you'll need to click on the data tab there, and then you'll find just a little halfway along data validation. So make sure you've clicked on the cell that will contain the answers, and then go to data and then data validation, and then you'll get this little pop-up window. Now we can see at the moment the user is allowed to type any value into this cell. Well, we want to change that, so if we click on this little drop-down menu, you see we have some options here. We could, for example, limit the user to typing in any whole number, or limit them to typing in the date, or limit them to text length. Say they're not allowed to type more than 10 characters. But we have a list of possible answers over here that we've just produced. So we're going to choose list. Now, once I've chosen list, I need to tell Microsoft Excel where that list is. And that's what we mean by source. The source of the list. Where is it? The location of the list. Now there's a little window under here, little text box under here, but if we click on the arrow at the end of that, we can now simply select that list with our mouse. So just simply click and drag across all of the answers that you're going to provide the user. Again, if you only have 2 answers, well, you'll only drag across 2 cells. If you have 5, then of course you'll drag across 5 cells. Once you've selected the list, you'll see that little floating window has shrunk, but there's still this little arrow on the right hand side. So click that and you'll be back to this window here. That's it, we're done. We can click OK, and now if I click on this cell, you'll see I have a little drop down arrow, and there are the options that I've typed. So that's the first list. Let's do this again with the second one. So again, I click in the cell where the list will appear. I go to data and then data validation. I choose list, and then I click on the arrow and select the list of answers for that second question. Once I've done that, I click on the arrow on the right hand side and then click OK. And again, if I click in this cell, you can see I've only got those numbers listed that are listed over here on the right hand side. Finally, my third question, so I click on the cell that will contain that answer, click on data validation, list, click on the arrow, select the answers, click on the arrow again and click OK. And now I have that list. Now, of course, that's all very well, but the user can still see these answers. We need to somehow hide them. There are a couple of different ways that we could do that. One, for example, would be to hide or to select all those cells and then change the font color to white, the same as the back color. That's one possible answer. Another would be to select these 3 columns here and then right click on any one of them and choose hide, and that will hide those columns. You can see that they're hidden at the top here because the letters go E, F and then jump to J. We can unhide those columns by clicking on the cell to the left of the hidden columns, dragging across to select the column on the right of the hidden columns, and then right click and choose unhide, and they're back again. For the moment, we'll hide those columns. We don't particularly need them, so I'm going to hide those columns, but even though they're hidden, we still have these drop down answers in each of these boxes. And again, I'm just going to select this column and select center align, just to make it a little bit easier and a bit neater to see. Okay, so we've now produced our answers. The next thing to think about is our scoring system. So what we're going to do is to have a way of adding up the number of correct answers. To do this, I'm going to click in this column, J, and type a formula. Because what I want to happen is for a number 1 to appear in this column if this cell contains the correct answer. And if this cell does not contain the correct answer, then a 0 will appear in this cell. So it's a formula which will make a decision based on the condition of this cell. That formula is an if formula. So I'm going to type in here equals, because of course all spreadsheet formulas begin with an equals, and then I'm going to type if. Now, as with any function word like if or sum or average or count, we need to open brackets straight afterwards. If we do that, we do have this little pop-up tooltip here which reminds us of the parts we need to add to our formula. So the first thing is logical test, or the question. What is it we're looking for? If what? Well, we want to know whether this cell here contains the answer 8. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8. So we want to know if this cell, which is F4, is equal to 8. So we can simply do that equals 8. So if F4 is equal to 8. Now that's the first part of this formula. I then put a comma, and you'll see this tooltip jumps to show that this bit is now in bold and the bit that the computer is waiting for us to complete. So the value if it's true. In other words, if F4 does equal 8. Well, if F4 does equal 8, it equals the correct answer, and so the user will get a score of 1. So I'm going to type a number 1. Then I'm going to put a comma, and again you'll see this little tooltip has jumped again because now it wants to know what to show if it's false. So if F4 does not equal 8. Well, if it doesn't equal 8, it's the wrong answer, and so we need a 0 in there. And finally, we need to close our brackets. So an if formula has 3 parts to it. What are we looking for? What do we show if we do find it? And what do we show if we don't? So if F4 is equal to 8, show a 1, otherwise show a 0. So if I press enter now, we're going to have a 0 because of course F4 does not equal 8. If I choose any answer from this list other than 8, this will remain as a 0. But if I choose the number 8, you'll see that that cell has now changed to show a 1. I have a score of 1 because I have the correct answer here. Okay, let's do the same thing for these two questions. So remember, the answer for this question is 15. So I'm going to write equals if, and then in brackets, I'm going to click on the cell that I'm going to be looking at, the answer cell, which in this case is F5. And I want to know if F5 is equal to 15. And if it is, show a 1, and if it isn't, show a 0. Close my brackets, and there we are. Again, we can test that by changing this to 15, and we can see we get a score of 1, but a score of 0 if we put anything else in there. Let's do it for our final question. So question 3, what is half of 3 times 8? Well, we know that the answer is 12, so we type equals if, click on the cell that will contain the answer. So if F6 is equal to 12, then show a 1, otherwise show a 0. Close our brackets, and there we are. So again, we can just test that by clicking in here, choosing 12, and seeing that we get a 1. Now, once we've got these numbers here, what we need somewhere underneath is a way of adding them all up. Well, that's fairly easy. What I'm going to do first of all is just write the word score, and then in this cell I'm going to type a formula which will just add up all of these. So that is simply equals sum, and then in brackets I'm going to highlight all of those cells and then close my brackets. So that shows me that I have a score of 0. But if I change some of these to the correct answers, you can see each time that I do that, my score goes up till eventually I get a score of 3. Now you'll see on the example I showed you earlier, it actually showed me what my score was out of the total number. How did I do that? Well, all I did is I changed this formula, so as well as showing the first number, which is the total score I have so far, I then add to that a little bit extra. I use the AND symbol, which is Shift 7 on your keyboard, and then in speech marks I simply type a / and then the maximum total that my quiz is out of. I have 3 questions, so it's out of 3. So it's simply AND speech marks /3 speech marks. Of course, if you have more questions, then you'll change that 3 to whatever it is that you can get. Now that shows me I have 3 out of 3. If I change one of these, I now have 2 out of 3, and so on. So now we've done the scoring system, we actually don't need this column to be visible anymore. So again, what I'm going to do is right click at the top of this column and choose Hide. Now, even though it's hidden, it's still there and my scoring system will still work. If I show you here, it's still showing me that, even though I can't see the column with all those zeros and ones in anymore. Okay, so that's our scoring system done. The next step we need to do is the colouring, so that each of these cells goes a different colour depending on whether the answer is correct or incorrect. So let's have a look at that, which is called conditional formatting. Now, conditional formatting is in the Home tab, which you'll see at the top here. Halfway along, there's conditional formatting. So the first step is to click on the cell which is going to be coloured. That's this cell because this is the one where the user is typing in the answer. So I click on this cell here and then click conditional formatting. Now all I'm going to do here is go down to Manage Rules. Rules are what we tell the computer so that it knows which colour to change a cell to and when to change it to that colour. We can have as many rules as we want. We're going to have 3 rules. One that says if there's no answer in that box at all, change it so that it is this plain white. If it's the correct answer, show it as green, and if it's incorrect, show it at red. So what I'm going to do in this conditional formatting window is click on New Rule. Now I get this pop-up window here. I'm going to go right to the bottom where it says use a formula to determine which cells to format. We're pretty much always going to be using formulas at this stage. So click use a formula and the bottom half now changes. This little text box here is where we type in the rule, where we say what it is we're looking for. Now we're going to put a rule here that says if this cell is blank, then don't colour it, don't format it, don't do anything. If we didn't do that, then possibly what could happen is the user would put in an answer, the cell would be coloured, maybe red, they'd get rid of that answer, but the cell would stay red. So that wouldn't work. We need to make sure that if it's blank, then there's no colour going on. So to do that, we type in equals, then we click on the cell that we're looking at, and then again we type an equals, and now we have to represent a blank cell. And blank or empty is represented by 2 speech marks. That's Shift and the number 2 on your keyboard. So our formula is equals F4 equals blank. In other words, the rule is if F4 is blank, then do something. Don't worry about these $signs, that's quite okay. We needn't change that at this point. We can leave that just as it is. And in fact, the format as well, we'll leave just as it is. It says no format set, so a blank empty cell will look blank and empty. Let's click OK, and there's our first rule. Now I need to click on New Rule again, because this time we're going to set up a rule that says if it is correct, if this cell contains the correct answer, then make sure that it goes green. So again, we're going to come to the bottom and use a formula. Again, we're going to click in this cell and start with an equals and click on the cell that we're looking at. And we want to know whether F4 is equal to, so there's my equal sign, and what is the correct answer? Well, it's 8, isn't it? We're looking to see if this cell contains the number 8. So I type an 8 in there. So equals F4 equals 8. Now, if it does equal 8, it's correct, so we need to change the format by clicking on this Format button. And I'm going to choose just the fill colour. You can also change the font and borders, but I'm going to keep it simple and just choose fill. And if it's correct, I'm going to choose green. Then I'm going to click OK, and then click OK again. And now finally, I want a rule that changes this cell to red if the answer is wrong. So again, I'm going to click on New Rule, use a formula, click in the box below and type in equals, and then click on the cell that I'm looking at. Now I want to know if F4 is not equal to 8. So how do I type a not equal to sign? Well, in maths, you may use a symbol that looks like an equal sign, but with a line struck through it. But we don't have that on our keyboards in IT, in computer science. So instead, we use the less than and the greater than symbol together. So the less than, greater than symbol, we use both of those together, and then we type in what the answer is, because of course what we're checking now is if F4 is not equal to 8. Then what do? Well, if it's not equal to 8, then it's wrong. So we simply change the format so that the fill colour is red. And then we click OK. And that's it. Click OK again, and we see our rules. Now, we need to make one little change here, and that is the order of the rules. What we want to do is to check whether the cell is blank first. If it's blank, then we want to do nothing else. So we need to move this rule up to the top, because this is the order in which the rules happen. So take this rule that's blank and use this little up arrow here to move it to the top. So you'll see that's now at the top of my list. And now what I need to do on the right hand side is put a tick in this little checkbox here that says stop if true, because if it is blank, we want to make sure that it doesn't go on any further. Why? Well, because the computer will try otherwise to check every rule. It'll look at this and say, yeah, it's blank, so I'm not going to make any change to the format. Then it goes on to the second rule. Okay, is this cell not equal to 8? Well, no, it's not equal to 8, it's blank, so it's going to change it to red. And we don't want that, we want it to just be plain white until we put an answer in, and only when there's an answer in there will it change either red or green. So once I've got that blank one at the top and I've ticked that box, I can click OK. So let's have a look at how this works. So I click in that cell, I choose an incorrect answer, and the cell goes red. Choose the other incorrect answer, again, still red. Choose the correct answer, and the cell goes green. And of course, my score updates down here as well. And if I delete everything that's in there, the cell goes blank, goes back to plain white. So now I've done that for the first cell, I need to do the same thing for the second and third question. I'll do this a little quicker, but do feel free to rewind the video or pause so that you can keep up. So this cell here, I'm going to click on conditional formatting, manage rules. Of course, this is blank because there are no rules for this cell. There are only rules for the top cell. So I'm going to click on New Rule, use a formula, click in the box, equals this cell equals blank. No format, click OK. New rule, use a formula. This one I'm going to do the correct answer, so it's equals this cell, which is the answer, equals 15, which is the correct answer. And if it is, then I'm going to change the fill color to green. Click OK, click OK. Final rule, this is if it's an incorrect answer, so use a formula, equals this cell here, and then it's a not equal to symbol, so less than, greater than, and if it's not equal to the correct answer, which is 15, then we're going to fill the cell red. Click OK, click OK. And finally, I need to click this blank rule here, move it to the top, and then put a tick to say if it matches that rule, then stop, don't bother checking these two. Click OK. Now let's just quickly test that. So put a wrong answer in there, goes red, the right answer, and it goes green. Fine. One to go then. So this last cell, conditional formatting, manage rules, new rule, use a formula, equals this cell, don't forget to click on the correct one each time, is equal to blank. Click OK. New rule, use a formula. This time we'll do the correct answer, so equals this cell equal to 12. If it's correct, it goes green. And then the incorrect answer, so use a formula, equals this cell is not equal to 12, then go red. And then just change the order of those rules and put a stop on that blank one. Click OK, and there we are. So now if I choose the correct answer from each one, I should find that all cells go green and my score shows 3 out of 3. So that's the conditional formatting, the colouring in of the cells. The only final thing that we can look at is just overall how to change the way that this looks, because at the moment it still looks very much like a spreadsheet. And there are some simple things that you can do that make it look a little more interesting. For example, a very simple thing is to change the font, because the font is a fairly dull one at the moment. So let's change that to something that looks a little more interesting. Obviously don't go for something which is really difficult to read, that's not going to be very helpful. Make sure it's nice and clear, but just simply change the font. We can zoom in a little further. Once you know how big your quiz is, you can zoom in so that it more or less fills the screen, and we can just move it around a little bit by widening or shortening some of these columns and rows. We can put, as I showed you before, a border around it. Simply put in shapes, and you can use shapes, you can use images, you can use whatever you like. I'm going to put a shape around this one. Click on no fill, change the outline. Let's change that to red, and in fact I'm going to make that a little thicker, so I'm going to click on more lines, and then I'm going to increase the width of this like that. We'll put a shadow on this as well perhaps, so let's add a shadow to this and maybe make that shadow a little bit bigger and blur it a little bit like that. And I'm also going to just distort the shape a little bit by right clicking on it and choosing edit points, so I can make it a little less like a rectangle and a bit more interesting. I can even curve the sides by clicking and pulling the sides out a little bit. There we go. And the final thing I'm going to do is come up to the View menu and untick the boxes that say grid lines and headings. I've also unticked Formula Bar already. And then finally, I'm going to click on this button at the top right hand side that says the ribbon display options. I'm going to do Auto Hide Ribbon. That little button is still at the top, so I can always get it back by choosing Show Tabs and Commands. But if I auto hide it, then my quiz becomes the only thing on the screen and it becomes a little bit easier to see. It is a bit squashed into the top left corner, so what I'm going to do is go back to view. I'm going to show the headings, which are all these letters and numbers, and I'm just going to make column A a bit wider and row 1 a bit taller, and then if I do the same thing again, then my quiz is a bit further in the middle of the screen. So let's now blank out those cells, and the user is now ready to do your quiz. So here we go. We're choosing some incorrect answers first of all, and we can see that our score isn't doing terribly well. Let's change those and have another go. Let's put in some correct answers, and each time I do, we can see our score going up by 1 until eventually we have all green and we have our score. So we have data validation, which limits the user to typing in just what we want into these cells, and to provide the user with a drop-down list of possible options. We have conditional formatting, which changes the colour of these cells depending upon what's inside the cell, and we can have as many rules as we want. And we've also got the if formula, which allows us to add up the scores for each of these questions and then showing the total at the bottom using the sum function. So I hope that that makes sense. Of course, you can make as many changes to this as you like. You can have more questions, more options, you can have true or false options, and you can even change the score for each one, giving the user 10 points for each correct answer, for example, to make it more interesting. It's up to you. I hope this makes sense, and I hope that you enjoy making your quiz.